Chapter 1241. The 41st level was a desolate and cold desert. It was vast and boundless. In this desert, there would be a tower every few hundred miles. The towers stretched from the lowest to the highest, stretching all the way into the distance. Rumble, a huge dragon-like black whirlwind suddenly appeared in the distance. Before the whirlwind even got close, a piercing chill blew over and frost formed on the surface of the desert. What's this? Old Ancestor Wooling had a bad feeling. This whirlwind had caused his soul sea to become slightly unstable. Take a detour. Inyang Kajer didn't dare to be careless and chose to take a detour. Unexpectedly, the whirlwind also started to change direction. Umph! Old Ancestor Hercules snorted and punched. The illusory fist shadow affected the void and struck the whirlwind. However, what surprised everyone was that although the fist shadow caused the whirlwind to disperse a little, the actual lethality wasn't that great. It was as if the whirlwind was nothing. In the blink of an eye, the black whirlwind was already near the five of them. Everyone looked closely and instantly felt their blood run cold. This wasn't an ordinary whirlwind. It was clearly a ghostly whirlwind formed by countless ghostly creatures. Ghostly figures were faintly discernible within. It's the Yellow Springs storm. It's filled with Yellow Springs ghosts. Old Ancestor Wooling's hair stood on end as he exclaimed. The Yellow Springs storm was one of the most terrifying storms in hell. This storm wasn't formed naturally but was formed by mixing Yellow Springs ghosts. Even the rarest impermanence ghosts in hell had to retreat when encountering the Yellow Springs storm. This was because after the Yellow Springs storm was formed by the Yellow Springs ghosts, their disadvantages were weakened and their advantages were strengthened. Once one was caught in it, they would immediately become a part of it. Old Ancestor Wooling began to suspect if Ghost Weeping Mountain was the territory of a Grade 3 mountain ghost. How could an ordinary Grade 3 mountain ghost have a large number of ghost beasts and a Yellow Springs storm? However, it made sense. Since this place was sealed, it was definitely unusual. Seal it. How could Inyang Kajer allow the Yellow Springs storm to get close to him? He quickly formed a seal with both hands and a ball of white air formed in front of him. Shortly after, the illusory figure behind him injected a black air current into the white air current. In the next moment, a black and white yin-yang diagram enveloped the Yellow Springs storm and completely restrained it. Patriarch Wooling wasn't slow either. The five-element seal descended from the sky and enveloped the netherworld storm and the black-white yin-yang image. Patriarch Golden Light also unleashed his own golden light dimension. Numerous mirrors that emitted intense golden light combined together. The golden light was blinding to the eyes. As for the Night Ghost Granny and the Herculean Ancestor, they weren't good at trapping, so they didn't interfere. After doing all this, the five of them rushed forward at full speed. Although the 3 layers of seals could trap any quasi-venerable for a very long time, the Yellow Springs storm was much more terrifying than a quasi-venerable. About a quarter of an hour later, a loud explosion came from behind them. The 5 of them knew that the seal had been broken. Rumble! The entire desert seemed to be trembling. The Yellow Springs storm chased after them at a speed 10 times faster than before. One could see that as the speed increased, the thickness of the Yellow Springs storm was also shrinking. However, with the distance between the 2 sides, the Yellow Springs storm could catch up to the 5 of them if it shrunk by 10%. At that time, any of the 5 of them would be in danger if they were caught. It's too fast. In just 100 breaths, it will catch up to us. Patriarch Wooling's heart sank after calculating the distance. Regardless of whether he had the strength or not, he didn't want to fight to the death with the Yellow Springs storm. That would be a foolish move that would harm himself. The Yellow Springs storm was getting closer and closer to the 5 of them. The entire Crying Ghost Mountain contained a unique sealing law that prevented teleportation. It would be good if they could reach 1,000th of the speed in space. Rumble! Good things never come in pairs, but misfortune never comes alone. The surface of the desert not far from the 5 of them suddenly collapsed. A pitch-black whirlwind rushed up. It was another Yellow Springs storm. Because the distance was too close, and the 5 of them maintained their maximum speed, they couldn't react in time. They could only subconsciously turn left and right. The result was obvious. The 5 of them were split in two. Old Yin Yang Man, the Night Ghost Granny, and the Herculean Ancestor flew to the right, while Patriarch Golden Light and Patriarch Wooling chose the left. Lure it away from me. Patriarch Wooling flicked his hand, and a figure flew in another direction. Upon closer inspection, one would see that it was the Stone Emperor with a dull expression. Unfortunately, the Yellow Spring Storm didn't care about the Stone Emperor at all. It continued to chase after Patriarch Wooling and Patriarch Herculean. Could it be that this Yellow Spring Storm is only interested in powerful souls? Patriarch Wooling guessed. There was no time to think. Patriarch Golden Light and Patriarch Wooling's expressions changed again. In front of them, the desert exploded, and the third Yellow Springs storm appeared. Damn it. Patriarch Wooling hurriedly turned right, and Patriarch Golden Light flashed left. Just like that, the two of them had a Yellow Springs storm behind them, and they ran for their lives. After chasing for a long time, the Yellow Springs storm howled. As the wind howled, the Yellow Springs storm speed increased tenfold, just like the first Yellow Springs storm. Sensing the movement behind him, Patriarch Wooling's pupils shrank. Fight! Patriarch Wooling flew toward the nearest tower. He was betting that the tower could defend against the Yellow Springs storm and buy him a breath of time. As for how he would escape, that was a matter for later. 1,000 miles. 500 miles. 300 miles. Patriarch Wooling was getting closer and closer to the nearest tower, but the Yellow Springs storm behind him was getting closer and closer. It was less than 25 miles away. Given the Yellow Springs storm speed, it would catch up before Patriarch Wooling could reach it. A pained expression flashed across Patriarch Wooling's face. He made his second difficult choice. He waved his hand and a 5-colored light flashed. A figure charged towards the Yellow Springs storm. It was Yi Chen. Yi Chen's soul was far more powerful than that of ordinary sovereigns. Although he couldn't compare to powerful sovereigns in terms of quantity, in terms of quality, he surpassed them by quite a bit. He wasn't inferior to a quasi-exalt. At this moment, Patriarch Wooling had no choice but to abandon Yi Chen. It was just like how he had abandoned his most precious golem formation on the 40th level. If I can't obtain the abyssal fruit this time, I'll have suffered a double loss. Yi Chen was one of the best materials he had seen in all these years. Perhaps he was the best. Yi Chen had nearly 80% of his original body strength. This was much more precious than anything else. If his life wasn't in danger, he wouldn't abandon Yi Chen even if he was beaten to death. Patriarch Wooling couldn't help but hate Patriarch Hercules even more. If Patriarch Hercules hadn't plotted against him, he could have used the golem formation to block the Yellow Springs storm and buy some time for him. He wouldn't have needed to abandon Yi Chen. Patriarch Hercules, just you wait. With a low roar, Patriarch Wooling scurried into the tower. The moment he was thrown out, Yi Chen had already woken up. Of course, when he had clashed with Patriarch Hercules, Yi Chen had already woken up quite a bit. Although Patriarch Wooling's control over him was strong, there was a limit. After clashing with Patriarch Hercules, this control had been greatly weakened. Given Yi Chen's willpower, he had naturally seized control of his mind. However, due to Patriarch Wooling's strength, Yi Chen had been hiding his sobriety. At this moment, Yi Chen's vision was filled by a dragon-like Yellow Springs storm. The next moment, his entire body was submerged in the Yellow Springs storm. Chapter 1242. Sush. Taking advantage of the short moment when the Yellow Springs storm engulfed Yi Chen, Patriarch Wooling rushed into the tall pagoda. There was nothing else on the first floor of the tall pagoda. There was only a black stone tablet with 6 blood-colored words written on it. Those who enter this place will die. This place? Patriarch Wooling knew that the other party should be referring to the 41st floor seal and not the tall pagoda. When he arrived at the second floor, there was the same stone tablet and the same words. The third floor was the same. Patriarch Wooling's heart gradually sank. If the other party was not exaggerating, then this place was really very dangerous. The 6 blood-colored words were like a brand, deeply imprinted in the depths of Patriarch Wooling's soul. Forget it. If I can successfully leave this place this time, I won't come back in the future. Patriarch Wooling was afraid. This place was too strange. It was not something a quasi-venerate like him could do. When he returned to the first floor, Patriarch Wuling stood at the door and looked at the Yellow Springs storm that engulfed Yi Chen. This child is talented. What a pity. Patriarch Wuling sighed inwardly. Then he sat down cross-legged and recovered his spiritual yuan. Inside the Yellow Springs storm, an illusory Yi Chen was pulled out. This was Yi Chen's soul. On this soul, there were densely packed 5-colored threads and runes. The key to Patriarch Wuling's control over Yi Chen was these 5-colored threads and runes. As the Yellow Springs storm spun intensely, the 5-colored threads and runes broke and disintegrated inch by inch. The runes disintegrated. Inside the tall pagoda, Patriarch Wuling's expression was gloomy. In fact, in the depths of his heart, he still had a glimmer of hope that Yi Chen could survive. Now this hope was shattered. The runes were broken, and Yi Chen's soul would not be any better. It would definitely be completely engulfed by the Yellow Springs storm and disappear from this world. The Yellow Springs storm did not have much lethality to the physical body, but it was fatal to the soul. Yi Chen felt as if his soul had entered a meat grinder. At every moment, it was spinning and slicing thousands of times. But at this moment, the uniqueness of Yi Chen's soul was also reflected. Not to mention the soul of an ordinary emperor, even the soul of a quasi-venerable would not be able to resist the Yellow Springs storm and would become weaker and weaker. Apart from being weakened at the beginning, Yi Chen's soul gradually rebounded. The stronger the pressure, the stronger the rebound. An inextinguishable soul fire burned fiercely. In fact, the souls that had awakened the eye of the soul were all special. The will of the universe had given them an inextinguishable characteristic. Of course, it was not absolutely inextinguishable, but to a certain extent. In addition, Yi Chen's immortal sword soul also played an inextinguishable role. Without the immortal sword soul, Yi Chen's soul would not have been able to withstand it a long time ago. The inextinguishable flame burned and the immortal radiance bloomed. Yi Chen's soul was as transparent as a god. Gradually, his soul returned to his body. Yi Chen opened his eyes. The will of hell. So that's how it is. At this moment, Yi Chen vaguely understood what hell was. If his guess was correct, hell should be the negative side of the universe, equivalent to the projection of the universe. And the will of hell was also the negative side of the universe, one positive and one negative. The Yellow Springs storm was still spinning crazily, as if it would not stop until it devoured Yi Chen's soul. Absorb for me. A terrifying aura suddenly erupted from Yi Chen's body. A mystical suction force was born. This suction force did not devour the Yellow Springs storm, but rather the will of hell contained within it. In hell, all ghosts had the will of hell, just like the martial will of a martial artist. The difference was that one was innate, while the other was acquired. A large amount of the will of hell entered Yi Chen's soul. Yi Chen's soul began its second evolution. Yi Chen had no other choice. If he didn't absorb the will of hell, he wouldn't be able to break free from the Yellow Springs storm. After all, this Yellow Springs storm had gathered a large number of Yellow Springs ghosts, and its power was boundless. No matter how strong his soul force was, it would still be devoured. After devouring a large amount of the will of hell, Yi Chen's body underwent a drastic change. First, the silver vertical eye on his forehead opened. In the next instant, this silver vertical eye split into two. The two silver vertical eyes appeared on Yi Chen's forehead, one on the left and one on the right. Their color gradually changed, from silver to crimson, then to golden red, and finally to pure gold. The pure gold vertical eye shifted downwards, fusing with Yi Chen's eyes. The intense pain caused Yi Chen to involuntarily close his eyes. Streams of blood flowed out from the slits of his eyes. Ah! An earth-shaking roar erupted as the Yellow Springs storm exploded. Only a figure floated in the air. Yi Chen's aura was still as sharp as before, like beams of sword chi shooting out. But this sharpness contained a pressure as vast as the sea of hell. At this moment, he was the center of this area. Crackle! Golden lightning danced. Yi Chen opened his eyes. His eyes were immeasurably deep, and his pupils were surrounded by a golden halo. If one looked closely, They could see two vortexes in Yi Chen's pupils. They were arranged in the shape of twin stars, slowly spinning. Seeing through space-time. Is this the evolved form of the soul eye? After his space profound reached completion, although Yi Chen could see through space within a certain range, it didn't include space-time. Moreover, he had to rely on space profound to sense it. It was like looking at a person through glass. But after his soul eye evolved, not only could Yi Chen see through space-time, but he could also see what had happened not long ago. It was like a movie rewinding. This kind of eye had already touched upon the changes of time and space, and was born with both profound mysteries of space and time. However, Yi Chen didn't know what this eye was called. Up until now, he only knew of two kinds of evolved forms of the soul eye. One was the soul destruction heavenly eye, and the other was the soul enchanting divine eye. If some old antiques were here, they would definitely recognize that this pair of eyes was very similar to the legendary Netherworld Sacred Eye. The Netherworld Sacred Eye was born from the will of hell, and it was like a fish in water in hell. Any ghost that encountered it would be innately restrained. That was because it could absorb the will of hell. Without the will of hell, it was the same as turning into a walking corpse. Of course, the difference couldn't be too great. For example, if he encountered a ghost king, even if the Netherworld Sacred Eye was 10 times stronger, it would still be useless. The two sides simply weren't on the same level of life or soul. It seems it's still not strong enough. When the Netherworld Sacred Eye first formed, Yi Chen felt that its source power wasn't strong enough. It seemed he needed to absorb more of the will of hell. If he could nurture his own will of hell, then the Netherworld Sacred Eye would be the true Netherworld Sacred Eye. This was his instinctive belief that it was close to an inheritance. The yellow spring storms that others flocked to were undoubtedly a delicious meal in Yi Chen's eyes. He didn't even need to search for them. As long as the Netherworld Sacred Eye scanned them, he would be able to see where the yellow spring storms were. 1 storm, 2 storms, 3 storms. In just 2 hours, Yi Chen had absorbed a total of 10 yellow spring storms. The will of hell in his eyes surged like the sea, and even Yi Chen couldn't control it. Wherever his eyes looked, he would feel a terrifying divine pressure. The last yellow spring storm was destroyed by Yi Chen's gaze. Chapter 1243. After absorbing 10 underworld storms, Yi Chen's Netherworld Sacred Eye had reached its limit. If he didn't consolidate it, he would explode from the underworld will. In his Sea of Soul, the Destruction Sword Soul and the Immortal Sword Soul were also trying to balance the new relationship. Previously, the world was divided into two, but now, it was a tripartite balance. Yi Chen discovered that after this near-death experience, the Destruction Sword Intent and the Immortal Sword Intent had made great progress. They both broke through to the peak of the 7th step, only a step away from the 8th step. The 8th step of the Destruction Sword Intent and the Immortal Sword Intent were equivalent to ordinary 9th step Sword Intent. They had reached the limit of ordinary Sword Intent and were comparable to ordinary Supremes. According to the legends, when the Sword Domain reached the peak of the 9th level, one would have a trace of the power of Sword God. Similarly, when the Sword Intent reached the peak of the 9th step, one would also have a trace of the power of Sword God. It was unknown whether this Sword Intent was ordinary or attributed. Of course, no matter what, even if the ordinary Sword Intent reached the peak of the 9th step, it would have an unimaginable divine might. However, until now, no Supremes had been able to push their will and domain to the peak. The power of God wasn't that easy to obtain. A trace of coldness appeared in Yi Chen's eyes. He saw old ancestor Wuling leave the tower and move further away. Yi Chen naturally wouldn't let him go. His 4 friends were still in the enemy's hands. However, with his own strength, even if he used the Netherworld Sacred Eye, it was almost impossible to defeat him. If a quasi-venerable could be defeated with a pair of eyes, then it wouldn't be worth anything. Yi Chen's current strength could at most contend with a peak emperor, and the 5 elements power that old ancestor Wuling gave him had long been dissolved by the underworld storms. It couldn't increase Yi Chen's strength, and Yi Chen didn't need it. Although the 5 elements power could increase his strength, it was also a means for old ancestor Wuling to control him. However, this was hell. After absorbing the underworld will, Yi Chen discovered that he could control the underworld storms through the underworld will. The underworld storms could kill quasi-venerables, and Yi Chen could control the underworld storms. This meant that Yi Chen could kill quasi-venerables. That was how the world worked. In no time, Yi Chen controlled 3 yellow spring storms. With a flash, Yi Chen entered one of the yellow spring storms and led the other 2 yellow spring storms in pursuit of old ancestor Wuling. The speed of the yellow spring storm was much faster than Wuling Patriarch. After 5 minutes, Yi Chen could see Wuling Patriarch with his naked eyes. 3. Patriarch Wuling's pupils constricted. 5 elements escape. 5-colored light emanated from Patriarch Wuling's body, and his speed increased exponentially. He was like a 5-colored meteor. Do you think you can escape? Within the yellow spring storm, Yi Chen muttered. As soon as he finished speaking, the yellow spring storm's speed increased tenfold. This was a method of increasing speed at the cost of burning the power of ghosts and the will of hell. I'll fight you to the death. Seeing that he couldn't escape, Patriarch Wuling's ruthlessness surged. He turned around and slammed his palm at one of the yellow spring storms. The 5-colored palm contained the power of the 5 elements and was flawless. It was extremely destructive even to ghosts. The Yellow Spring Storm was a combination of countless Yellow Springs ghosts, and a portion of it was dispersed. However, the other 2 Yellow Springs storms took the opportunity to attack Patriarch Wuling. They could have devoured him, but he was protected by a layer of 5-colored light, and the Yellow Springs storm was deflected slightly. Boom, boom, boom. If the first time didn't work, the second time, the third time, gradually, the 5-colored light protecting Patriarch Wuling grew weaker and weaker. In the end, there was a popping sound like a bubble bursting. 5 elements seal. As one of the powerful quasi-venerables, Patriarch Wuling had countless powerful life-saving methods. This time, the 5 elements seal wasn't used to seal the Yellow Spring Storm. With his power, he could only seal 1 Yellow Spring Storm at most, and he couldn't seal it for too long, let alone 3. He used the 5 elements seal to seal himself, which was equivalent to adding a protective barrier to himself. You do have some tricks up your sleeve. Yi Chen didn't want to waste too much time with his opponent. The Netherworld's sacred eye flashed, and one of the Yellow Springs storms shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although it had shrunk in size, the Yellow Springs storm's density had increased countless times. It was like a spinning awl that stabbed at the seal. Cracks appeared on the 5-element seal. Under Yi Chen's control, the other Yellow Springs storm also transformed into the same form. They attacked the 5-element seal from the left and right. More and more cracks appeared on the 5-element seal, and they spread out like a spider web. I haven't lived long enough. I can't die. Patriarch Wuling's eyes shone with a terrifying light. He waved his hand, and a miniature puppet array descended from the sky. Of course, a small puppet array couldn't stop the Yellow Springs storm from devouring him. Patriarch Wuling pointed at his chest, and with a puff, a thick arrow of blood spurted out. The arrow of blood didn't land on the ground, but floated in the air. Patriarch Wuling pointed his finger, and the arrow of blood turned into blood-colored runes. Buzz! When the so-called blood-colored runes were born, a ring of light mixed with blood and 5 colors spread out. Circle after circle, it was like ripples in the water. I will use the price of 90% of my remaining lifespan to summon the puppet True God's Will. Patriarch Wuling shouted loudly. The puppet True God's Will. Yi Chen's eyes were solemn. He didn't believe that Patriarch Wuling could summon the true puppet True God's Will, but as long as there was a remnant, it was terrifying enough. The power of a true god wasn't limited to the surface. They could change the world and turn the impossible into the possible. Even a trace of remnant will have terrifying power. For the first time, the space of hell fluctuated. A huge shadow appeared from the void, and it enveloped Patriarch Wuling. This shadow was expressionless, and its eyes were a mass of emptiness. But when Yi Chen looked at this mass of emptiness, his mind immediately became muddled, and he felt like he had forgotten everything. So strange. Yi Chen didn't dare to look anymore. So what if it's the Yellow Spring Storm? This is my final trump card. If a person blocks, I will kill him. If a god blocks, I will kill a god. Patriarch Wuling seemed to have gone mad. This method of summoning the puppet true god's will was the highest profound meaning of the heaven-seizing puppet secret technique. He didn't summon the puppet true god's will, but he gathered the remnant of the puppet true god's will in the human world. The moment it became a true god, a part of its will would be integrated into the universe and become a part of it. Those miracles were the manifestation of the true god's will. However, the true god's will couldn't be controlled. Even if it was a remnant, it wasn't something that mortals could touch. Patriarch Wuling had used up 90% of his remaining lifespan to barely gather a bit of it. As for whether it would be assimilated by the puppet true god's will, he didn't care. "Why did you summon me?" The illusory figure's words startled old ancestor Wuling and Yichen. Patriarch Wuling swallowed his saliva. He pointed at the 3 yellow spring storms and said, "Help me end them. It's best if you can turn them into puppet storms." The shadow glanced at the 3 yellow spring storms. "Sure, but you don't have enough life force." Suddenly, Patriarch Wuling screamed. His entire body was sucked away at a speed visible to the naked eye. He was integrated into the shadow, and the shadow became slightly more solid. Chapter 1244. Yi Chen's pupils shrank. Wuling old ancestor was already dead. He didn't know if the 5-element space was still there. As for the puppet true god's will, it was obviously not an inanimate object. Thinking about it, it made sense. The will of a true god was not something mortals could imagine. It was not wrong to say that it was one of the billions of incarnations of a true god. The illusory figure, which had become a bit more solid, looked at the Yellow Springs Tempest. His gaze ignored everything and directly looked at Yichen. "Interesting little fellow. You actually awakened the netherworld divine eyes. With this pair of eyes, you are like half the master of hell. The 4 failed puppets inside the 5-element space should be your friends, right? Here you go." The shadow stretched out his right hand and opened it. A 5-colored ball of light slowly floated towards Yichen. "I have already unlocked the puppet secret technique on them. Being refined into puppets is good for them and bad for them. The good is that the mysteries of the 5 elements are imprinted in the depths of their souls. The bad is that there is still a trace of this person's will hidden in the depths of their souls. One day, when this will is strong enough, it is not impossible for it to possess their souls." Yichen nodded. Indeed, as the shadow had said, being refined into a puppet allowed him to know some mysteries of the 5 elements. In the future, it would be much easier to create supreme techniques related to the 5 elements. However, he did not understand why the shadow did not kill him. Wasn't he summoned by Wuling old ancestor? Although Wuling old ancestor had already been killed by him. The shadow seemed to know Yichen's question. "Come out. These 3 yellow spring storms are mine." Hearing this, Yichen thought that it was like that. Wuling old ancestor did not know that he was in the Yellow Spring Storm, so the purpose of summoning the puppet true god's will was to refine the Yellow Springs Storm into a puppet. The puppet true god knew that Yichen was in the Yellow Spring Storm, but for some reason, it did not make things difficult for Yichen. Holding the 5-element space in his hand, Yichen walked out of the Yellow Springs Storm. The illusory figure waved his hand, and the 3 Yellow Springs storms fused together, becoming an even larger one. Shortly after, this Yellow Springs storm began to compress, fusing with the illusory figure. In the end, a primal chaos illusory figure appeared, but its eyes were still empty. Crackle! In the instant that all of this was completed, the sky suddenly crackled with lightning. The lightning was pitch black, and a powerful voltage was applied to Yichen's body. Yichen felt his body go numb, and his soul was on the verge of collapsing. "Not good, what kind of lightning is this?" Yichen hurriedly flew far away to avoid being affected. It was obvious that the pitch-black lightning was directed at the puppet true god's will and had nothing to do with him. Even the apocalyptic thunderbolt has appeared. "Don't worry, I won't challenge your authority." The chaotic shadow took a step forward and disappeared from this world. As the chaotic shadow left, the black lightning also gradually disappeared as if nothing had happened. The 5-elemental space belonged to Wuling Forefather. When Wuling Forefather died, the soul imprint on it became much weaker. Without much effort, Yichen erased the soul imprint that belonged to Wuling forefather and replaced it with his own. What happened? Ancestor Wuling is dead. The moment they were released, the Scarlet Wind Emperor and the others asked with lingering fear. Yichen nodded and explained what happened next. That was close. Fortunately, that old guy is dead. Otherwise, we'd be under his control for the rest of our lives. Yeah, it was really too dangerous this time. A paragon is indeed a paragon. He simply couldn't resist. Our strength is far from enough. The Scarlet Wind Emperor's face was gloomy. Anyone who almost became a puppet for the rest of their lives would be in a bad mood, not to mention that the Scarlet Wind Emperor was a dignified emperor. Stone Emperor said, "Supreme Holy Land will open in 80 years. At that time, as long as one is at the 8th layer of life and death realm, they can enter. We'll strive to reach the 8th layer within 80 years and enter the Supreme Holy Land together." That's right. Supreme Holy Land usually opens once every 10,000 years. This time, it's 2,000 years early. If we miss this chance, the next time will be 10,000 years later. The Fire Sparrow Emperor nodded. Yichen said, "Supreme Holy Land opens in 80 years? He hadn't heard anything about Supreme Holy Land. Snow Air Emperor explained, "Supreme Holy Land is the graveyard of deceased paragons. Almost all the deceased paragons of the 4 great life starfields are inside. Due to the special rules of Supreme Holy Land, the corpses of paragons will not decay, and their chi and blood will not deteriorate. Their bodies still contain powerful energy and will. If one can obtain the inheritance of a paragon, it can save countless years of hard work." Scarlet Wind Emperor continued, "The closer one gets to the center of Supreme Holy Land, the more powerful the pressure of a paragon becomes. Ordinary emperors can only seek opportunities in the periphery, and only the truly powerful emperors can enter. It's said that there are many corpses of supreme paragons in the center of Supreme Holy Land. There are even corpses of paragons who dominated an era." Yichen nodded. The corpses of paragons from ancient to modern times were all inside, so there were bound to be some heaven-defying paragons. However, he didn't know what the inheritance of a paragon was. If he accepted the inheritance, he would have no choice but to walk the path of the paragons. If it was only a kind of power that could be transformed into his own in the future, Yichen could accept it. After all, even if he wasn't powerful, others would be powerful. Moreover, power was power. It was very simple. From birth, people began to learn other people's things. Let's leave this place first. Hell was too dangerous. Even paragons were in a precarious situation here, not to mention them. Yichen didn't expect to obtain any treasures here. He only wanted to find the exit as soon as possible. In order not to drag Yichen down, the 4 entered the 5 element space again. After a week, Yichen returned to the foot of the Crying Ghost Mountain. Originally, with Yichen's strength, it was impossible for him to come out alive. However, he had the Netherworld's sacred eye. Ordinary ghosts were completely suppressed. Even that ghost beast, which was comparable to a second-level mountain ghost, couldn't do anything to Yichen. Every time it pounced on him, it would be dispirited and listless by the Netherworld's sacred eye's hell will. "Hey, one came out? So weak?" On the guest platform, the eyes of the skull flickered endlessly. Yichen walked over and sized up the skull. After confirming that the other party could think, he asked, "Do you know where the exit to hell is?" "Why should I tell you? Unless you give me 50 ghost stones." "Sure. Give me the ghost stones first." "Tell me first, then I'll give them to you." "Fine, if you lie to me, I'll swallow you alive." The skull didn't believe that Yichen would play any tricks. Although it was bound here, if it wanted to swallow a puny human, it was too easy. It couldn't do anything to those quasi-venerables from before. Walk 50 billion li in that direction, and there'll be an exit. As for whether it's the entrance you came in from, I don't know. Are you sure? Yichen was a little skeptical. Hand over the 50 ghost stones. The eyes of the skull burned fiercely. I don't dare to confirm whether what you said is true or not. How about this, when I confirm it's true, I'll give it to you. Yichen turned and flew in the direction indicated by the skull. You're courting death. The skull was furious. It opened its pitch-black mouth, and a pitch-black storm swept toward Yi Chen. Facing the pitch-black storm, a golden light flashed in Yi Chen's eyes. Pooh, the storm suddenly dissipated, and a terrifying hell will rush toward the skull. The skull screamed, and the fire in its eyes dimmed. How is this possible? This is the Netherworld Sacred Eye. You're a human, how can you have the Netherworld Sacred Eye? I hope what you said is true. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Yi Chen's figure flashed, and he instantly disappeared. Hee, the exit is naturally true, but every exit is guarded by Netherworld ghosts. You can't leave. No, he has the Netherworld Sacred Eye. Why would he be afraid of Netherworld ghosts? For a moment, the skull was extremely distressed. Chapter 1245. This exit is indeed real. With the Netherworld Sacred Eye, Yi Chen could easily see whether the exit was real or fake. As for the Nether ghosts guarding the exit, he directly ignored them. As long as they weren't Grade 2 mountain ghosts or above, no ghost was a threat to him. As for Grade 3 mountain ghosts, they were at best a ferocious beast. It would be difficult to defeat them, but it wouldn't take too much effort to get rid of them. With a flash, Yi Chen escaped into the hazy passageway. At the end of the passageway, a black figure was faintly discernible. Behind him was a white barrier with flowing water waves and threatening cold air. Just as the black figure was about to attack Yi Chen, a golden light flashed, and the black figure instantly turned into nothingness. Puff! Yi Chen passed through the white barrier. So cold. Is this the depths of the heavenly river? Yi Chen had experienced this kind of cold in the depths of the heavenly river, and it got colder the deeper he went. The calm water contained the changes of time and space. Without enough strength, it was impossible to find the way out. This was a huge island, and in the center of the island was a lake. Suddenly, a pillar of water erupted from the center of the lake, and a figure broke out of the water. The figure was Yi Chen. So it's the lake of the island. After looking around for a while, Yi Chen understood. It was obvious that this place was similar to the volcanic island, an entrance to hell. After leaving hell, Yi Chen released the Scarlet Wind Emperor and the others. The outside world is still the best. The Scarlet Wind Emperor heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. The Snow Air Emperor hesitated. I don't know if this is a Grade 5 tributary. If not, it'll be even more difficult to leave the Heavenly River. Although the Grade 5 tributary of the Heavenly River was vast and boundless, it was still possible to leave in 3 to 5 years. If one was lucky, 1 or 2 years would be enough. If it was a Grade 4 tributary, it would take at least 10 times more time. If it was a Grade 3 tributary, or even a Grade 2 tributary, or even the main branch, it wasn't a matter of time. If one's realm wasn't high enough, they wouldn't be able to leave for a lifetime. Legend had it that ordinary Supremes would be trapped for countless years if they entered the main branch of the Heavenly River, unless they reached a profound realm in the profound meaning of time and space. It doesn't matter. This is still a 5th grade tributary. I can see the boundary at the edge of the Heavenly River. As for how far the Netherworld Sacred Eye could see, Yi Chen didn't have a concrete idea. However, compared to the Soul Eye, the Netherworld Sacred Eye's ability was more than 1,000,000 times stronger. Millions of li could only be seen within a few inches, while the Soul Eye's range was only 1,000,000,000 li. It could be said that the Netherworld Sacred Eye itself had the property of space and time. Combined with Yi Chen's perfect space profound, the range of his vision was unimaginable. After spending half a year, Yi Chen's group of 5 finally left the Sky River and arrived in outer space. This was mainly because the space-time in the Heavenly River was ever-changing. Sometimes, it could be sped up and sometimes, it would be slowed down. We're finally out. At this moment, the 5 of them felt as if a lifetime had passed. The Heavenly River was still too dangerous for them. Being able to come out alive could be said to be a stroke of luck. However, they wouldn't be so lucky every time. This time, if not for Yi Chen, they would have all become puppets, living a life worse than death. Emperor Dao's spirit root belongs to the fated. I won't think about it anymore. This time, I'll go into closed-door training. I won't come out until I break through to the 8th layer. Another few months passed, and the 5 arrived at White Tiger Starfield. Stone Emperor bid farewell to the 4. Next, Fire Sparrow Emperor, Scarlet Wind Emperor, and Snow Air Emperor also bid farewell to Yichen. Supreme Holy Land's opening was imminent. Apart from Scarlet Wind Emperor, the others all wanted to break through to the 8th layer within 80 years. Scarlet Wind Emperor was also not satisfied with his current strength, so he also wanted to increase his strength after returning. Finally, only Yichen was left. 8th layer Life and Death Realm. No rush. I'll first digest the mysteries of the 5 elements power. Although there were still 80 years before the opening of Supreme Holy Land, which was not enough time for anyone, Yichen wasn't in a hurry to increase his cultivation base. He had to wait until his foundation was solid enough and he had a 100% chance of breaking through. Right now, the most important thing was to digest the mysteries of old ancestor Wuling's 5 elements power. The sooner he could comprehend it, the sooner he could create his own supreme 5 elements sword art. Hell Ghost Whale Mountain. Old Man Yin Yang, Grandma Night Ghost, Vigorous Ancestor, and Golden Light Ancestor followed in Old Ancestor Wuling's footsteps and were all annihilated. Of course, Old Ancestor Wuling was killed by the true god puppet's will, while the others died under the endless Yellow Springs tempest. This was merely the 41st floor. Nobody knew what kind of dangers lay in the 42nd to the 49th floor. Perhaps, this place was originally a forbidden area of hell. The will of the puppet true god, the only one who could enter and leave freely and no one could stop him, had no interest in this place. He had already gone to an unknown place. There was no one in the world who could detect the traces of the true god's will, even if it was just the remnant will left behind by the puppet true god. 50 years passed in the blink of an eye. On a desolate planet near Planet Flaming Star in the Vermilion Bird Star region, a destructive sword aura erupted into the sky. Everything in its path was shattered and annihilated. Doomsday Calamity. After spending 50 years, Yichen finally created his own supreme sword art, Doomsday Calamity. Fusing 4 types of profoundness and fusing 5 types of mutually reinforcing and restraining profoundness were not on the same level. The latter was hundreds or thousands of times more difficult. Even with Yi Chen's comprehension ability and old ancestor Wuling's 5 elements power, it took Yi Chen a full 50 years. Doomsday Calamity, which contained the power of the 5 elements, was thousands of times more powerful than the Doomsday Meteor Sword. At this moment, Yi Chen finally had the strength to fight against a quasi-venerable. Of course, although he had created Doomsday Calamity, it was far from reaching perfection. Fusing 5 types of mutually reinforcing and restraining profoundness was too difficult. A mere 50 years was not enough. Yi Chen could only fuse a little bit of it, which was only the tip of the iceberg. Even old ancestor Wuling's 5 elements palm technique was only the tip of the iceberg. Apart from Supremes, almost no one could comprehend a supreme martial art to perfection. Back in the dragon race, Yi Chen had seen the image of the green-robed emperor in the image recording crystal. Although it was not a supreme martial art but a 5th revolution martial art that contained the 5 profoundness of metal, wood, water, fire, and wind, the green-robed emperor had fused these 5 profoundness to a very high degree. This was much more powerful than old ancestor Wuling's 5 elements palm technique. A supreme martial art was an extremely difficult path. On the contrary, 5th revolution martial arts and 6th revolution martial arts could improve much faster. However, one's potential was limited. Which one to choose depended on the individual's situation. After 50 years, my foundation has more or less solidified. But it's still not enough. I haven't reached the critical point yet. 50 years of cultivation had made Yi Chen's foundation incomparably firm. At this moment, he had 80 to 90% chance of breaking through. If it were someone else, they would have already started breaking through. However, Yi Chen had higher requirements for himself. His goal was not only the 8th life and death realm, but also the 9th life and death realm. One wrong step and every step would be wrong. He would not make such a mistake. Chapter 1246. Time flew by and time was merciless. In the blink of an eye, 30 years had passed. There was only 1 or 2 years left before the opening of the Supreme Holy Land. On this day, Yichen sensed something in his heart. The sword yuan inside his body was showing signs of palpitating. It was time to break through. In the past 80 years, Yichen had 100% certainty of reaching the 8th sky of life and death realm. No one would believe it. It should be known that reaching the 8th sky of life and death realm was 100 times harder than reaching the 7th. Without hundreds or thousands of years of accumulation, it would be impossible to solidify one's foundation. However, sometimes, geniuses could not be judged with common sense. If every genius needed a lot of time to increase their cultivation base, then they would not be geniuses. Moreover, the reason why Yichen could have 100% certainty of reaching the 8th sky of life and death realm in the past 80 years was mainly because he had created a supreme sword art. The improvement of his martial arts realm allowed Yichen's mental state to become more perfect. With a perfect mental state, his cultivation base would naturally become more stable. In addition, the utilization of the 5 elements also allowed the human body's yin and yang 5 elements to reach an absolute balance, which could also greatly solidify one's foundation. I wonder how many yuan stones would it take to reach the 8th sky of life and death realm? The only thing Yichen was worried about was whether he had enough yuan stones. Reaching the 7th sky of life and death realm consumed 300 million yuan stones. Reaching the 8th sky of life and death realm would not be as simple as 10 times. Under normal circumstances, the cultivation base of the 8th sky of life and death realm would be 10 times that of the 7th sky of life and death realm, and the purity would be several times higher. However, what Yichen had was sword yuan, which was several times purer than Zhen yuan. Multiplying the two, it would be more than 100 times, which was a frightening number. Without breaking through immediately, Yichen began to prepare the yuan stones. 3 days later, the yuan stones in Yichen's storage ring had reached 40 billion. 12 billion came from the yuan stone pond. In the past 80 years, the pond could produce 100 million yuan stones every year. Once it reached 10 billion, Yichen would take it out, lest it couldn't produce any more. Another 28 billion and 10 billion came from the flame planet's taxes. Indeed, the entire planet now belonged to Yichen. Yichen's actions in the God Paradise were seen by the upper echelons of the human race. Rewarding a third-grade life planet was not a big deal. On the contrary, if there was nothing at all, it would be unreasonable. Flame Star's annual tax revenue was more than 100 million. Including other income, the total revenue was almost 200 million. 30% was paid to the human race's upper echelons, and the remaining 70% was still more than 100 million. After 80 years, it wouldn't be difficult to reach 10 billion. As for the last 18 billion, he had made a trip to a 6th-grade life planet. In the past few years, he had obtained a lot of treasures, some of which he couldn't use, so he put them up for auction. 18 billion was only half of the total value. The other half would only be given to him after the end of the auction. That should be enough. 40 billion yuan stones was a shocking number. It was simply unimaginable for those under the 7th layer of life and death realm. Even if they didn't eat or drink for their entire lives, they wouldn't be able to earn this much. Getting rid of all distracting thoughts, Yichen entered seclusion to break through to the next realm. Breaking through to the 8th layer of life and death realm was much more powerful than breaking through to the 7th layer. To a certain extent, breaking through to the 8th layer was almost a heaven-defying move. The universe also had life, and the life inside his body was nurtured by him. When he was weak, he could increase his strength very quickly. But once he reached a certain level, his improvement would become slower and slower. After all, the universe wouldn't allow him to become infinitely stronger. Otherwise, the universe itself wouldn't be able to bear it. Why did the universe have no true gods? It was probably because the true gods had surpassed the limits of the universe. Around the desolate planet, lightning flashed, and the dark clouds that shrouded countless planets gradually converged. Is someone breaking through to the 8th layer? The commotion caused by Yichen's breakthrough was too great, and could be seen from millions of li away. If an ordinary heavenly tribulation was a heavenly tribulation on a planet, then this one was a cosmic heavenly tribulation. When breaking through to the life and death realm from the Sea of Soul realm, there would be a heavenly tribulation. Afterwards, every time one made a breakthrough, there would be a chance of being sensed by the heavenly tribulation. Although the heavenly tribulation was frightening, many people yearned for its arrival, because its arrival meant that one's strength was powerful enough to attract the attention of the heavens. In fact, every time Yichen broke through in the past, there would be a heavenly tribulation. However, those heavenly tribulations were too weak, and were directly turned into Yuan Qi by Yichen and refined into his Zhen Yuan. The reason why this heavenly tribulation was so powerful was due to two reasons. First, the 8th layer of life and death realm was different from the 7th layer. It was getting closer and closer to the limits of the universe. Second, Yichen's accumulation was too deep. Soul Power, Sword Yuan, and Netherworld Saint Ai, which one of them wasn't a heaven-defying existence? Who knew whether breaking through to the 8th layer of life and death realm would cause a huge increase in strength and cause a chain reaction? Someone from the human race is about to break through to the 8th layer. Let's go and take a look. Last time, the Emperors of the Demons Alliance failed to kill Yichen and instead suffered heavy casualties. However, this didn't stop the Demons Alliance from assassinating him. They absolutely wouldn't allow a peerless genius to grow, even if they had to pay a certain price. Last time, it was a mid-grade emperor, but this time, it was peak emperor level and even 3 demigods. They had been in Vermilion Bird Starfield for less than half a year. After all, sneaking into human territory was extremely dangerous. If they were sensed, not only would they fail the mission, they would also be unable to escape even if they grew wings. The supremes of the human race could sense a boundless distance with a single sweep of their soul power. The 3 demigods were all old men nearing the end of their lifespans. They had no hope of breaking through and were the best candidates for this mission. Moreover, the higher-ups had promised them that if they could complete the mission, they would be rewarded with some lifespan-increasing treasures. Normally, they wouldn't even dare to think about it. Although demigods weren't cabbages, there were still quite a few of them. Moreover, there were only so many lifespan-increasing treasures. The movement speed of demigods was extremely fast. After a few teleportations, they arrived at the center of the heavenly tribulation. An 8th layer life and death tribulation was nothing in their eyes. "It's that kid." A black light flickered in one of the demigods' eyes, revealing a shocked expression. They couldn't imagine how many years it had been, yet the kid already had the confidence to attack 8th layer life and death realm. As far as they were concerned, Yichen had at least 70 to 80% chance of breaking through. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen to do so. This kid is too frightening. Once he becomes an 8th layer life and death heavenly sovereign, killing him will be difficult. Seems like the heavens are still looking out for our Demons Alliance. He doesn't have a protector by his side. Killing him now will be as easy as flipping one's hand. 3 demigods and 8 peak emperors. Such a lineup was practically invincible under the Supremes. Even if they encountered a peak demigod, they would still have the power to fight. A demigod with a head full of serpent hair flickered out, his body brimming with killing intent. When he reappeared, he was already on Yichen's planet. This demon was once a famous figure among the demons. He was called Myriad Snake Demonic Ancestor, not inferior to Old Ancestor Wuling. Die! With a sudden wave of his right hand, countless serpent phantoms charged at Yichen, containing the 5 profounds of gold, water, wind, shadow, and poison. Weaker opponents would immediately be sucked dry by this myriad snake annihilation palm. Chapter 1247. Destroy. With just one sword strike, Yichen destroyed the countless snake shadows of the snake demon ancestor. The moment the Doomsday Calamity was born, Yichen already had the strength to fight against Wuling Old Ancestor. Although the snake demon ancestor was strong, he wasn't stronger than Wuling Old Ancestor. Just the aftermath of the destructive sword gleam was enough to split the planet in half. Lava spurted out like flying flames, and the universe was illuminated. Supreme Sword Technique. The snake demon ancestor shouted and hurriedly dodged the remnant sword gleam. There were also strong and weak supreme martial arts. For the same profoundness, creativity determined the strength. For example, some people could only build rough houses, while others could use the same materials to build exquisite houses. Similarly, the snake demon ancestor himself had a fifth revolution martial art. Although his future potential was far inferior to a supreme martial art, for now, the progress of a supreme martial art was too slow. On the contrary, a fifth revolution martial art was easier to develop and improve. Therefore, as long as the degree of integration of profoundness wasn't too deep, the snake demon ancestor didn't fear a supreme martial art. Of course, he wasn't just shocked by the doomsday calamity. He was even more shocked by the sword intent of this sword, which faintly showed signs of ignoring all defenses. This was a phenomenon that could only occur with a 9th grade sword intent. An ordinary 9th grade sword intent was already the limit. Compared to a peak 9th grade sword intent, there was only a difference in quantity and control. The difference in quality was very small. The opponent's sword intent was the destruction sword intent. An 8th grade destruction sword intent was equivalent to an ordinary 9th grade sword intent. In other words, the opponent's sword intent was about to break through to the 8th grade. Rumble. At this moment, lightning as thick as a mountain struck down from the boundless dark clouds. Without exception, all of these lightning bolts shot toward Yichen. With powerful enemies outside and a heavenly tribulation inside, Yichen was undoubtedly in an abyss of suffering. However, Yichen didn't care. The sword energy in his body was gradually transforming into an even stronger sword energy. As long as he could endure this period, even if 3 more quasi-venerables came, they wouldn't be a match for him. 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion. In a short period of time, Yichen had already used up 30 billion source stones, and in exchange, he had nowhere to vent the energy in his body. This kind of energy was too vast, and in a short period of time, Yichen had no way to completely refine it. The arrival of the heavenly tribulation was the perfect time to temper this powerful energy, and the appearance of a powerful enemy could also vent a portion of the uncontrollable energy, making his breakthrough even smoother. Everything was under Yichen's control. Demonic ancestor myriad snake, why are you going soft? Watch me. Another quasi-venerable charged at Yichen. He was divine Emperor Hulk of the Green Man race, and he cultivated the profound meaning of power. He punched out, causing the void to undulate as if it had turned into a tidal wave, crashing towards Yichen. This was God Emperor Hulk's clear sky fist. In the face of quasi-venerable Hulk's ultimate move, Yichen also slashed out with his sword. The berserk fist energy split the tidal wave in two. The destructive sword intent contained within Doomsday Calamity was enough to split and tear apart everything. Even the profound of power couldn't stop it. Of course, a sword move that could contend against a quasi-venerable naturally consumed a lot of sword yuan. Before breaking through, Yichen could only use it twice. After that, his sword yuan would be exhausted. However, now that he was about to enter the 8th layer of life and death realm, his sword yuan was not only more vigorous, but also pure. Using Doomsday Calamity a dozen times wouldn't be a problem. Once he broke through, he would be able to use it dozens of times. As far as Yichen was concerned, the true problem was the universe's heavenly tribulation. The heavenly tribulation contained the universe's will, and even Yichen couldn't completely disperse it. A portion of the tribulation's power would always land on Yichen's body, creating a large amount of sparks. If not for his 7th step spirit body containing immortal power, Yichen wouldn't even need to be assassinated. He would have been the first to succumb to the heavenly tribulation's might and be on the verge of death. It could be said that if one wanted to break through to the 8th layer of life and death realm, their spirit body couldn't be too weak. Demon ancestor myriad snake deity Emperor Hulk and the other quasi-venerables' faces turned ugly. Myriad snake ancestor said, "This kid is a monstrous genius. We can't use common sense to calculate him. We can only take advantage of his heavenly tribulation to join hands and kill him. Right, this kid is much more monstrous than the geniuses of my clan." Deity Emperor Hulk was no longer as relaxed as before. His face was filled with solemnity and killing intent. The 8 of you also join hands to attack him. Make sure he can't wholeheartedly resist the heavenly tribulation. Myriad Snake Ancestor turned around and ordered the 8 Apex Emperors. The leading Apex Emperor sucked in a deep breath and looked at Yi Chen with disbelief. Although the heavenly tribulation was constantly destroying Yi Chen's body, it was also tempering the sword yuan within Yi Chen's body. Again and again, it was as if it was forging a peerless sword. The universe's will within the heavenly tribulation was tempering Yi Chen's soul and sword soul. Only the hell's will was hidden in the depths of his soul, not receiving the tempering. Kill! 2 torrents charged at Yi Chen like 2 apocalyptic demonic dragons. The thicker one was the joint attack of Demon Ancestor Myriad Snake and Divine Emperor Hulk. The 3 of them combined their strength, and although it was not a perfect fusion, its power was at least 2 or 3 times stronger. The thinner one was the joint attack of 8 peak-level Martial Emperors. Its destructive power was also not to be underestimated, and it was equivalent to the all-out attack of a Martial Emperor. 2 apocalyptic demonic dragons, one in front and one in the back, emitted a majestic aura. Yi Chen didn't dare to be careless. He pushed the Immortal Sword Intent and Destruction Sword Intent to the limit. The Immortal Sword Intent protected his body, and the Destruction Sword Intent accompanied the Doomsday Disaster to kill the enemy. The vigorous sword radiance tore apart heaven and earth. Even a planet seemed incomparably small in front of this sword radiance, like a speck of dust. The pitch-black starry sky instantly lit up. Rumble! An earth-shattering explosion occurred. The broken planet beneath Yi Chen's feet turned into ashes. The magma instantly extinguished and turned into nothingness. Even the dark clouds that shrouded countless planets were blasted open by the shockwave. Countless bolts of lightning darted back and forth like dragons, interweaving into a net. Myriad Snake Ancestor, Deity Emperor Hulk, the 3 Quasi-Venerables, and the 8 Apex Emperors were all sent flying. Yi Chen's sword was unbelievably powerful. Of course, Yi Chen didn't have it easy either. His hands exploded inch by inch, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Even the flying heaven sword in his hand was sent flying into the depths of the universe. A good chance. Myriad Snake Ancestors' eyes lit up. An expert's weapon was also a part of their power. If they lost their weapon, their battle prowess would be greatly reduced. Let's work together again. This time he will die for sure. Deity Emperor Hulk knew that this opportunity couldn't be missed. After a few breaths' time, the 2 apocalyptic demonic dragons attacked again. This time, Yi Chen was barehanded. He couldn't recall the flying heaven sword for a while. With my heart as a sword, I will cut through everything. Facing a desperate situation in the eyes of ordinary people, Yi Chen didn't flinch or panic. His heart was as tough as steel, and his soul was like a diamond that had been tempered hundreds and thousands of times. Whether or not he had a sword in his hand couldn't affect his emotions. Instead, it could stimulate his power. Having a sword in his heart was enough. Kill! Grasping the air with both hands, Yi Chen slashed out with a sword. This sword wasn't as clear as before, but it was even more unfathomable. It had an indomitable attitude, and nothing in the world could block the sharpness of this sword. In this desperate situation, the 2 sword intents broke through and reached the 8th rank. Chapter 1248. 8th grade sword intent could already destroy the fabric of spacetime, let alone a supreme 8th grade sword intent. Half-step sovereign sword energy, 8th grade destruction sword intent, supreme sword art doomsday calamity. Even without the flying heaven sword, Yi Chen's current state had already surpassed Wuling Old Ancestor's level. He was confident that he could easily suppress Old Ancestor Wuling if he met him again. The 2 furious demonic dragons suddenly disintegrated under the invisible sword light, as if they had never existed. All traces of them had been directly erased. Although the invisible sword light dissipated, it didn't disappear. It turned into a boundless sword wind that rushed over Demon Ancestor Myriad Snake and the others. Demon Ancestor Myriad Snake and God King Hulk spurted out a mouthful of blood. The other 8 peak sovereigns weren't so lucky. Their bodies instantly disintegrated and disappeared like ashes. 8th grade destruction sword intent. God King Hulk said word by word. Fight him. Demon Ancestor Myriad Snake clenched his teeth. If Yi Chen had already finished his tribulation, they would immediately retreat. But the tribulation was only halfway through. He didn't believe that Yi Chen could last much longer. Boom, boom, boom. Thick bolts of lightning struck Yi Chen's body, splitting his skin and muscles. He was bathed in blood, and specks of golden light were faintly discernible in his blood. This was the power of indestructibility. It was said that the 9 transformations golden body was powerful not only because of its powerful defense, but also because it contained several times more indestructibility than others. There were only a few things in the world that could restrain it, and there was only one saint artifact. Boom! A bolt of lightning as thick as a dragon followed the top of Yi Chen's head and struck into his body. All his flesh and bones were instantly penetrated. The next moment, Yi Chen's entire body began to glow, emitting intense light. His eyes even spat out 2 electric snakes. The unbearable pain made Yi Chen grit his teeth, but he still wore a faint smile on his face. His spirit body began to improve. The universe tribulation was tempering him in all aspects, including his soul, sword energy, and spirit body. Not a single one was left out. The heavenly tribulation was both a danger and an opportunity. If one could not overcome it, it could only mean that one's foundation was not strong enough. If one could overcome it, it would be a brand new world. Yi Chen was naturally not afraid of the heavenly tribulation, but there were still the snake demon ancestor and the other 2 quasi-venerables. Sensing Yi Chen's strength, the trio did not hesitate to expend their essence this time to execute a forbidden secret technique. The myriad snake demonic ancestor's glabella was pitch black, with a black vortex in the middle. The vortex spun slowly, and gradually, a small black snake burrowed out. The snake was not corporeal, but it was not illusory either. It looked like it was formed from ink. Only its cold eyes were red, like rubies. God Emperor Hulk continued to gather his energy. His already huge body gradually expanded to around 5 meters tall, turning into a Hulk. The surface of his body was filled with thick green veins that were constantly squirming. It was a disgusting sight. The sound of his heartbeat was like someone beating a planet-sized drum. Thump, 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 thump. It shook the universe and shattered it. The other quasi-venerable was the evil spirit race's old monster, Heavenly Evil. He was preparing an evil technique that could curse powerful quasi-venerables to death. He spat out a mouthful of blood and used it as a guide to draw a complicated talisman pattern in the void. Yi Chen's blood floated within the talisman pattern. This was what he had gathered from the starry sky. Although it was only a small ball, it was enough. Gradually, this small ball of Yi Chen's blood turned into a blood person. He looked exactly the same as Yi Chen, and there was no difference in his expression. If there was someone knowledgeable here, they would definitely be able to tell that this was a curse clone. The so-called curse clone was a kind of spiritual body condensed from curses and the enemy's blood. It had a close connection with the enemy. If the curse clone died, the main body would also be implicated. In serious cases, it might even die. The first to attack was the myriad snake demonic ancestor. That ink-black snake's figure flashed and suddenly disappeared. When it reappeared, it was already in front of Yi Chen and instantly entered Yi Chen's soul sea. Immediately after, Divine Emperor Hulk unleashed the most powerful attack in his life. A fist the size of a water tank swung out, and the violent fist wind was 10 times more terrifying than a cosmic storm. The world seemed to be destroyed in an instant, and the world sank into darkness. Space and time were distorted by the fist pressure. There was no way to dodge this punch, because the fist wind had already enveloped space and time. The last to attack was old monster Heavenly Evil. He concentrated, and the color of his face turned from white to red, from red to green, from green to purple, and finally to white. Die! His finger seemed slow, but it was actually very fast. It hit the blood person in the talisman pattern, and with a poof, the blood person exploded and became nutrients, completely fusing into the talisman pattern. Soon after, the talisman pattern shrank and condensed into a dot. With a flash, it also entered Yi Chen's body. Impossible! The myriad snake demonic ancestor's expression suddenly changed, and he vomited mouthful after mouthful of blood. He was like a critically ill patient, and his expression was extremely dispirited. He had just sensed that his life-bound spirit snake had actually disappeared. This was a part of his soul, and it contained the origin of his soul. It wasn't as simple as pure soul force. Now that the life-bound spirit snake had disappeared, the foundation of his soul was injured. Not to mention that he wouldn't be able to recover for the rest of his life, his soul reserve had also dropped to the level of a titled monarch, no longer a quasi-sovereign. Old Monster Heavenly Evil's expression also changed. He was in an even worse state than the myriad snake demonic ancestor. His entire body started to rot from the inside out, and stinky pus splattered everywhere. Even his undying body and undying energy couldn't stop this trend, and could only slow it down. The curse actually backfired. What was going on? Old Monster Heavenly Evil didn't manage to curse Yi Chen, so he lost his target, and the curse completely rebounded on him. A curse that could kill a powerful quasi-sovereign wasn't that simple. This kind of power was a double-edged sword. If it couldn't injure the enemy, it would injure the user. Only a supreme could expel it, or the evil god's sacrificial altar could absorb the power of the curse. The only thing that was effective was the Hulk God King's terrifying fist wind. Yi Chen was directly sent flying, and more cracks appeared on his body. It could only be said that the myriad snake demonic ancestor and Old Monster Heavenly Evil's luck was too bad. The thing that Yi Chen feared the least was strange attacks. Not to mention the fact that his Destruction Sword Soul and Immortal Sword Soul weren't weak, the Hell's Will was even more unfathomable. The myriad snake demonic ancestor's life-bound spirit snake and Old Monster Heavenly Evil's curse were simply sending themselves to their deaths in front of the Hell's Will. A world-shaking roar resounded. Yi Chen, who was sent flying, stopped his retreat. He clenched his fists and fiercely sucked in a breath of air. This breath of air lasted for a very long time, so long that it formed a storm in the starry sky. The storm grew larger and larger, and finally affected the tribulation clouds above. Crackle! Countless lightning bolts were sucked into Yi Chen's body along with the storm. Yi Chen's body grew brighter and more transparent. In the end, the light emitted from Yi Chen's body was even more dazzling than an ordinary sun. His figure could no longer be seen. Has he gone mad? Hulk God King's mouth was wide open. Chapter 1249. Yi Chen naturally didn't go crazy. He was only a fine line away from the 8th layer. As long as he broke through, the heavenly tribulation would naturally vanish. Although devouring a large amount of tribulation lightning was dangerous, it could speed up his breakthrough. If this continued, God Emperor Hulk alone would have the opportunity to kill him. After all, the immortal energy in his body was already running out. Devouring so much tribulation lightning at once was no joke. Yi Chen felt as if his body was melting and evaporating. From the inside to the outside, from his internal organs to the most basic life Yuan Qi, it was all filled with tribulation lightning. At this moment, Yi Chen's world turned blank as if there was nothing in it. Break! It seemed like an eternity, but in fact, it was only an instant. Yi Chen's life form suddenly changed, and an extremely frightening pressure erupted, enveloping the heaven and earth. 8th layer life and death realm, complete. All the tribulation lightning within his body was completely refined by Yi Chen, making his 8th layer sword Yuan incomparably solid. His spirit body also broke through the peak of the 7th step and reached the early 8th step. If it were anyone else, it would have been impossible. The main reason was that the heavenly tribulation Yi Chen was facing was too powerful and contained too much of the universe's will. As the saying goes, fortune and misfortune depend on each other. The 7th layer is controlling the body, and the 8th layer is controlling the heaven and earth. The moment he reached the 8th layer, the universe changed in Yi Chen's eyes. Even the space profound became much clearer. No wonder 8th layer life and death heavenly monarchs didn't need space profound to teleport. This control over the heaven and earth allowed them to remove a part of the spatial obstruction. The tribulation clouds enveloping countless planets came and went quickly. As the clouds dispersed, Yi Chen's gaze fell on God Emperor Hulk and the other two. If I don't leave now, then when? God Emperor Hulk didn't care about demon ancestor Myriad Snake and old freak Heavenly Evil. His figure flickered and instantly appeared several billion li away. You think you can escape? As soon as God Emperor Hulk appeared, his forehead was pierced by a sword. He was fast, but Yi Chen was faster. Bang! God Emperor Hulk's body exploded into smithereens, and even his indestructible energy was wiped clean. The 8th Heavenly Sword energy combined with the 8th Step Destruction Sword intent had completely erased God Emperor Hulk's existence from this world. Opening the Netherworld's sacred eye, Yi Chen saw the fleeing demonic ancestor Myriad Snake, but he didn't chase after him. Yi Chen's left hand stretched out and retracted, and the space-time started to distort. A sword pierced through tens of thousands of layers of space. Just like Hulk Deity Emperor, Thousand Snake Demon Ancestor exploded into pieces, and his storage ring and precious Emperor-grade artifact instantly appeared in Yi Chen's hand. As for old monster Tian Xie, there was no need for Yi Chen to kill him. He suffered from the backlash of the curse-killing technique and died before the two of them. 3 quasi-sovereigns and 8 top-notch martial emperors had fallen in this battle. Although Yi Chen didn't know exactly how strong he was confident that he wouldn't be afraid of anyone below the Supreme Being level. Of course, he wouldn't be invincible, but even an invincible quasi-Supreme Being wouldn't be able to easily suppress him. These 80 years had been an earth-shaking period. Not only had Yi Chen's strength advanced by leaps and bounds, the people of God Paradise had also advanced by leaps and bounds. The majority of the people Yi Chen was familiar with had left God Paradise, because they had all reached the 7th layer of life and death realm. The old had left and the new had come. Currently, there were only a few people Yi Chen knew in God Paradise. Among the people Yi Chen was familiar with, Agio's achievements were indeed the highest. It was said that his martial path phantoms had increased from 5 to 10, which he called top 10 martial paths. Back when the two fought, he only had 4 phantoms. Closely behind him were lifeless blade artist Lung Fifan and Duguju. Both of them were blade artists and could be said to be the brightest of the time. Both of them had set their sights on surpassing the other. For the moment, Lung Fifan still held the upper hand. After all, in terms of foundation, Lung Fifan was much more profound, while Duguju had started too late. His current accomplishments were already astonishing. Su Jing and Murong Qingxing were also not bad, as well as Dantai Mingyue, Jiang Tian, Lu Wujian, and Snow Sword of Gojoseon. Moreover, 20 years ago, Stone Emperor had also successfully broken through to the 8th layer of life and death realm. It was said that he had spent a sky-high price in an auction to buy an Emperor Dao spirit root with only a remnant of its medicinal power remaining, allowing him to barely break through. However, his foundation was damaged after all. Becoming an 8th layer Sky Sovereign meant that his cultivation base was much weaker than an ordinary 8th layer Sky Sovereign. It would take a long time for him to recover. If not for Supreme Holy Land, Stone Emperor most likely wouldn't have chosen to break through hastily. The opening of Supreme Holy Land was fast approaching. All the rich and powerful families in the 3 great life star fields were sparing no effort to nurture their juniors. Supreme Holy Land only opened once every 10,000 years. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to wait for another 10,000 years. Now was the perfect time to use the 10,000 years of accumulation of the families. At this moment, it was all about foundation. The Dragon Clan had also recalled Su Jing, intending to nurture her with all their might. They wanted her to break through to the 8th layer of life and death realm before Supreme Holy Land opened. Although it would be detrimental to the future, it was not worth mentioning compared to Supreme Holy Land. If they missed Supreme Holy Land, no matter how deep their foundation was, they would still be lacking in luck. Not everyone could be like Yi Chen, whose foundation was deeper than anyone else's and who could break through in such a short time. The majority of 7th layer life and death geniuses with potential only had 2 choices. One was to stabilize their foundation and wait until they had 80 to 90% certainty before breaking through. The other was to hasten their growth and disregard the future. As long as they had 50% certainty, they would go all out. Of course, hasten their growth also depended on whether the seedling had a solid foundation or not. Without that, no matter how many treasures one had, it would be useless. Cultivation base still had to be done step by step. It was impossible to break through one layer after another without suffering. Even if it was possible, it would only create a mediocre powerhouse. Such mediocre powerhouses could be found in the 3 great life star fields, if not 10,000. The Dragon Clan was nurturing Su Jing, and Yi Chen was also preparing to nurture Murong Qingqing at all costs. Yi Chen had spent more than 30 billion yuan stones to break through this time, leaving him with about 8 billion yuan stones. Adding the ones he had yet to obtain from the auction house, he had several tens of billions of yuan stones. Yi Chen decided to use them all to buy some treasures that could strengthen his foundation and increase his cultivation base. Murong Qingqing had already broken through to the 7th layer for 30 years. She could be considered to have a bit of a foundation. Otherwise, even Yi Chen would have no way to help her. Days passed one after another. In the blink of an eye, there was only 1 year left before the opening of the Supreme Holy Land. Under Yi Chen's all-out nurturing, Murong Qingqing had finally reached the peak of the 7th layer and could now attempt to break through. For this, Yi Chen had prepared 3 Emperor Dao Divine Pellets, which could increase her chances of breaking through by 10% in a short time. Murong Qingqing had 3 chances. After 3 tries, it would be very difficult to break through. She could only take 3 Emperor Dao Divine Pellets in her lifetime. Chapter 1250. Rumble. The tribulation clouds covering countless planets converged once again. However, this time, their target was no longer Yi Chen, but Murong Qingqing. In the last 3 months before the opening of the Supreme Holy Land, Murong Qingqing had finally triggered the universal tribulation, advancing toward the 8th layer of life and death realm. However, she had failed twice before, and this was the 3rd time. Yi Chen discovered a use of the Hell Will, and that was to neutralize a part of the universe's will, reducing the might of the heavenly tribulation. After all, Murong Qingqing did not walk the normal path, but the demonic path. The demonic path was fast, but the foundation was unstable, and it was easy for one to go berserk. If the power of the heavenly tribulation was too great, it would injure one's soul and martial yuan spirit. This heavenly tribulation lasted for a long time before finally dissipating. At the same time, a powerful pressure spread out. It was the pressure of an emperor. Finally succeeded. Using Hell's will to contend against the universe's will was a strenuous and unrewarding task. Although the universe's calamity didn't have a pure consciousness and only had instincts, it would still carry out symbolic punishment to the one who interfered. A single mistake could easily lead to the end of both. Therefore, Yi Chen had only dared to do this after experimenting twice. In other words, in this world, perhaps only Yi Chen possessed the Hell Will. It was inevitable but also accidental. Both were indispensable. After breaking through to the 8th layer, Murong Qingqing's demonic power was very unstable and the starry sky was flickering. This was the side effect of forcefully breaking through. Without any treasures to suppress and harmonize the demonic power, it would take hundreds or even thousands of years for the demonic power to become as smooth as an arm. The current Murong Qingqing's strength was equivalent to a low-level emperor, and this was still because she could fight above her realm before. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be comparable to a low-level emperor. Take the yin-yang life-death pill first. Yi Chen was already prepared, so he handed over a black and white pill. The yin-yang life and death pill came from one of the top 10 alchemists of the Phoenix clan, the Sunflower Water Pill Emperor. It was all thanks to the Fire Sparrow Emperor that he was able to obtain the yin-yang life and death pill. After all, the Sunflower Water Pill Emperor was even more famous than the Silver Soul Pill Emperor who refined the Purple Soul Refining Pill. He was ranked among the top 3 alchemists of the Phoenix clan. The yin-yang life and death pill was a high-level emperor-grade pill, and it had many uses. One of them was to harmonize yin and yang, stabilizing the 5 elements in the body. If the demonic power or Zhenyuan was unstable, it was because the yin and yang in the body were not in harmony, and the 5 elements were in chaos. Of course, the yin-yang life and death pill could only adjust the condition, and it could not help the body reach its peak state all of a sudden. In order to reach the peak state, the body had to rely on itself, and the pill was only an aid. Murong Qingqing nodded and swallowed the yin-yang life-death pill. The center of the White Tiger Star sector was a land of nothingness. It was filled with a thick black color and not a single star could be seen, as if it was a chaotic universe that had yet to be formed. 100 years have passed, the supreme holy land will open. At first, this voice could only travel several hundred light years. However, as space and time trembled, the voice traveled further and further. Soon, all 3 major star areas could hear it. The supreme holy land has opened. Unfortunately, we are only at the 7th layer of life and death realm. The 8th layer is too difficult. That's right. Unless we don't care about the price and spend a huge amount of treasures, we can't reach it in a short period of time. Those rich families' disciples are really lucky. Although the price of forcibly breaking through is huge, it's nothing compared to entering the supreme holy land. If they're lucky, they might even obtain a supreme's inheritance and eliminate the hidden danger in their foundation. Forget it. Even if we break through to the 8th layer, we won't be able to do anything after entering. The supreme holy land is cut off from the outside world. If we don't have enough strength, we might even be killed. Some of the older generation's 8th layer sky sovereigns are approaching the end of their lifespans, so they value the supreme's inheritance even more. Riches come from danger. You can't say it like that. All of a sudden, the 3 major star areas were talking about the supreme holy land. In the void, a golden battleship was flying at an extreme speed. Inside the battleship sat Yi Chen and Murong Qingqing. Su Jing's destination was the Azure Dragon Star area, so she wasn't with the 2. I heard that Duguju has become the disciple of Yin and Yang Blade Emperor, and Dantai Mingyue has joined the High Heaven Pavilion. They should both be at the 8th layer of life and death realm. Murong Qingqing's demonic power had stabilized a lot. After becoming an emperor, her body now had a noble and graceful aura. Yi Chen faintly nodded. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor is one of the top blade emperors of the human race. He has the strength of a quasi-monarch. The High Heaven Pavilion is an emperor-level power. Raising the 2 to the 8th layer of life and death realm is not hard. Duguju and Dantai Mingyue, who came from Elysium, didn't have any background. Wanting to break through to the 8th layer of life and death realm in a short period of time was too difficult. Although Yi Chen wanted to, he didn't have the resources to provide them. Raising Murong Qingqing was already his limit. Of course, the 2 might not necessarily accept it. Becoming the disciple of a powerful expert or joining a powerful force was undoubtedly a wise decision for them. Ju, you are Master's 8th disciple, and also the disciple that Master favors the most. I hope that during this trip to the Supreme Holy Land, you will be able to obtain the inheritance of a Blade Sovereign. Heaven Flower Planet, Yin and Yang Peak. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said to Duguju, Master, rest assured. Duguju won't let you down. Duguju cupped his hands and bowed. Alright, you can go now. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor waved his hand. Farewell, Master. Turning around, Duguju flew into the sky and left. Ju is more suitable for the Blade Dao than my 7 disciples. Whether he can succeed or not will depend on his luck. Encountering Duguju was an extremely coincidental thing. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor took a liking to the latter and personally went to his residence, asking to take him in as a disciple and promising to raise him to the 8th layer of life and death realm. After interacting for a while, Yin and Yang Blade Emperor once again realized that the latter was a rare Blade Dao genius. Perhaps he might not be able to inherit his legacy, but he would certainly be able to walk further on the path of the Blade Dao. As for why he didn't go to the Supreme Holy Land, it was quite simple. He had already been there twice. The Supreme Holy Land not only required strength, but also opportunities. It was not a place where one could reap rewards just by going there, and it was also not a place where one could reap rewards just by having strength. Having been there twice, he knew that he had no fate with the Supreme Holy Land, and forcing it would only ruin his own Dao heart. At the same time, Dantai Mingyue also left the High Heaven Pavilion and headed toward the central void of the White Tiger starfield. Having reached the 8th layer of life and death realm, her aura was extremely stable, and it did not seem like she had experienced a forceful breakthrough. The Yin-Yang Sky Patching spell is a secret martial art of my High Heaven Pavilion. Although it is not a martial art, it is more powerful than a martial art. Once trained to a certain level, it will be able to reverse the cycle of yin and yang, making up for all the deficiencies. This was what the pavilion master had told her. A supreme holy land Chu Zhongtian have arrived. Back then, Chu Zhongtian was over 50 years old and could not enter the god paradise. However, this did not hinder his growth. After traveling for nearly 100 years, he relied on his perseverance and luck to successfully break through to the 7th layer of life and death realm. Then he met a mysterious old man. He did not know what the old man's strength was, because he could not even touch the old man's bottom line. Under the guidance of the mysterious old man, he advanced by leaps and bounds, reaching the 8th layer of life and death realm. Yichen, Dugaju, you too should be going to the Supreme Holy Land, right? That's good too, being alone is too lonely. Chapter 1251. At the center of White Tiger Starfield, there was a starry gate comparable to a planet. On the left side of the gate was coiled an azure dragon, and on the right side was a white tiger roaring. Above it was a vermilion bird soaring, and below it was a black tortoise carrying the entire gate. It gave off a vast and majestic feeling of oppression and vicissitudes. At this moment, the starry gate had already opened. The inside was a sea of chaos, and no one knew where it led to. Seems like I, old ancestor Tsong Kong, am the first to arrive. An aged figure instantly appeared in front of the gate. With a chuckle, his figure flickered and entered the gate. Supreme Holy Land was only open to 8th layer life and death realm experts. Without sufficient cultivation base, one couldn't even see the gate. Although Supremes could see it, they couldn't enter. The first was the rule, and the second was that one shouldn't look down on this gate. It was one of the 4 spiritual gates that had been born since ancient times. It was mysterious and unfathomable, and anyone who dared to offend it would be crushed. As time passed, more and more emperors entered Supreme Holy Land. Some were nearing the end of their lifespans, some were like the sun in the sky, and some were young emperors. All of them had the same goal, to obtain the inheritance of a supremacy and shorten the time needed to break through. It should be known that any supremacy's inheritance contained the secret of breaking through to the 9th layer. Without this secret, it would take a lot of time to figure it out by relying on oneself or other supremes. In the distance, a purple battleship appeared. The cabin door opened, and 3 youths walked out, 2 men and 1 woman. The leading youth was clad in purple. As he looked around, he gave off an indescribable domineering aura. Judging from his powerful aura, he was clearly a quasi-venerable. The man and woman following behind him were much weaker than him in terms of aura. They should be peak emperors or high-level emperors. Purple-robed emperor, is Supreme Holy Land really as mystical as the legends say? The empress was very curious about Supreme Holy Land and asked. The purple-robed youth smiled and said, "It only opens once every 10,000 years. Just this point alone is enough to show how extraordinary it is. After entering, you all have to be careful. There are countless corpses of paragons inside. Their corpse chi has formed new life forms that are proficient in some of the martial arts of paragons. The stronger ones even have the strength of a quasi-paragon. However, they usually appear in the core region." The purple-robed emperor was one of the 4 young quasi-venerables of the human race. The 4 young quasi-venerables were purple-white, golden-green, and the green-robed emperor was also one of them. On the quasi-venerables list, the purple-robed emperor was ranked 19th, while the green-robed emperor was ranked 21st. Although there weren't many quasi-venerables among the major races, there were more than 10 times more than supreme beings. Being ranked 19th was almost invincible among those below the supreme being level. In comparison, old ancestor Wuling Yinyang Old Man, and the others could only be considered as powerful quasi-venerables. The purple-robed emperor alone could easily suppress all of them and eliminate one or two of them. The purple-white, golden-green, and golden-white quasi-venerables were all far from 10,000 years old. In their respective generations, they were all number one in the paradise of gods. Over the countless years, no one knew how many number one rankers of the paradise of gods there had been. All they knew was that the weakest among them was a high-level emperor, and the strongest was an honorable. Let's go in. The purple-robed emperor's figure flickered, turning into a purple cloud that floated toward the gate of four souls and disappeared within. Supreme Holy Land. This enormous holy land was actually a plain. There were strong plains and weak plains. The weak plains, even without a gate, couldn't stop the invasion of life and death kings. The strong plains, on the other hand, were close to a world with a world barrier. Even supreme beings couldn't invade them. Although Supreme Holy Land wasn't a world, it wasn't too far off. Moreover, the aura of the supreme beings' corpses had corroded the entire plain over the years, giving it its own spirituality. If a supreme being wanted to invade it, it would be harder than invading a world. Supreme Holy Land was the foundation of the human race. Without it, the human race would undoubtedly be much weaker. This was also the reason why the powerful races would grow stronger and stronger, while the weak races would never be able to close the gap. This was the accumulation of countless years, and as time passed, the accumulation would only grow stronger and stronger. Of course, it had to be mentioned that the human race's supreme holy land wasn't the strongest. The land of demons and demons was even more famous. Evil spirit race had their land of evil spirits, barbarian tribe had their savage holy land, and giant tribe had their giant spirit graveyard. The boundless supreme being corpse chi formed a faint mist. In Supreme Holy Land, the martial aura was extremely dense. Even if a supreme being died, the aura and will they left behind contained the essence of martial skills. This essence could even change the rules of space and time. Creating martial skills here was 10 times, dozens of times, or even 100 times easier than outside. Many supreme martial skills were created in Supreme Holy Land, and the creator could perfect them in Supreme Holy Land. Each mountain represented a supreme being's corpse. Yi Chen and Murong Qingqing were currently in the periphery. Trespassing into Supreme Holy Land, die. Within the mist, human figures rushed out one after another. These figures were either using fire profound martial skills, water profound martial skills, or earth profound martial skills. Each of these martial skills was extremely powerful. Even Yi Chen didn't think that the first change martial skill he had created could surpass them. These figures weren't people, but new lives formed from the Supreme Being's corpse energy. They were commonly called corpses. Although corpses were living beings, they lacked intelligence. They only had the instinct to display martial skills. In Supreme Holy Land, they were immortal and indestructible. Once they were killed, they would be born again in the next moment. Endless martial skills. This is truly worthy of being called a Supreme Holy Land. Yi Chen praised. Every time he killed a corpse, Yi Chen would gain insight into a martial skill. Although this martial skill didn't have much power, it contained a trace of the Supreme Being's martial skill essence. The more he saw, the more inspirations he would have. Gradually, the two of them ventured deeper into Supreme Holy Land. As they went deeper, the strength of these corpses became increasingly strong. From a first revolution martial skill, it became a second revolution martial skill. This is almost my limit. Murong Qingqing looked at the nearest mountain. Yi Chen nodded, be careful. The corpses were just a small problem. The key was how to get close to the Supreme Being's corpse. The closer one got to the Supreme Being's corpse, the stronger the strength of the corpses and the more terrifying the might of their martial skills. Although there were a large number of corpses displaying second revolution martial skills, once they got close to the Supreme Being's corpse, it was normal to see corpses displaying fourth revolution martial skills. Fortunately, the power of the corpses wasn't endless. Yi Chen continued to venture deeper. As for the Supreme Being's inheritance, he didn't care much about it. It would be best if he had it, but it didn't matter if he didn't. What he cared about was the atmosphere of martial arts. Here, He felt that his inspiration was always flying. In the outside world, it would take a long time for him to have a trace of inspiration. Chapter 1252. Kid, the Earth Star Border Sovereign's inheritance belongs to me, Wanhua Emperor. Get out of my way. Wanhua Emperor was a peak emperor. As a peak emperor, if he wanted to go one step further and become a quasi-sovereign, he would need at least a few thousand years to reach this goal. However, if he could obtain the supreme inheritance, he could do it in a short period of time. Moreover, there was the possibility of breaking through to the supreme realm in the future. Is that so? Although I don't know if the inheritance is suitable for me, there's no reason for me to let you have it. Chu Zhongtian grinned as he struck towards the Wanhua Emperor. Courting death. Wanhua Emperor was furious. His body burst out with countless rays of light as he punched out. Rumble. The earth shook, and Wanhua Emperor vomited blood as he was sent flying. Quasi-sovereign. Wanhua Emperor was shocked. Not bad. Although he said so, Chu Zhongtian thought inwardly, Master said I have the strength of a quasi-sovereign. I didn't believe it at first, but now it seems to be true. You win. Wanhua Emperor turned and left. White-haired kid, the inheritance of Iron Blood Blade Sovereign is not something you can touch. Don't force me to take action. Leave quickly. The same situation happened to Duguju. However, Duguju's opponent was even more powerful than Wanhua Emperor. He was clearly a quasi-sovereign, titled Star-Splitting Blade Emperor. If you want to fight, then fight. What's with all the nonsense? Compared to the supreme inheritance, Duguju seemed more interested in his opponent. He pulled out his blade and attacked. Bastard, you asked for it. Seeing his opponent so arrogant, Star-Splitting Blade Emperor's eyes turned cold. He pulled out his shining blade and slashed out with Star-Splitting Slash. Clang, clang, clang. After exchanging over 100 moves, neither of them could do anything to the other. The Star-Splitting Blade Emperor was only a normal one among the demigods, but Duguju was not that bad either. He also had the strength of a normal demigod. The Yin and Yang Blade Emperor had spent half of his lifetime's wealth, and it was not as simple as raising Duguju to the 8th sky of life and death realm. Yin Yang Blade Emperor's Yin Yang Blade Arts? Star-Splitting Saber Emperor vaguely recognized Duguju's saber technique, but he was not sure. The reason why Xiaochen could not be sure was that Duguju's Yin Yang saber technique was different from the Yin Yang saber sovereigns. Although it was much more immature, it had other things. Of course, the essence was the same. They both borrowed force to fight. The Yin Yang Saber Emperor was famous among the quasi-venerables. The Yin Yang Saber technique was a famous martial art. The Star-Splitting Saber Emperor knew his own limitations. He knew that even if his strength increased by 10 times, he would still not be a match for the Yin Yang Saber Emperor. The other party possessed the Yin Yang Saber technique. The chances of him defeating the other party were slim. Do you still want to fight? Duguju secretly exclaimed that the Yin and Yang sabersmanship was really powerful. He thought to himself, my cultivation has improved, but my sabersmanship has not. I only have 60% to 70% of the essence of the master's Yin and Yang sabersmanship. After adding some of my own things, it actually has such power. Not only can it resolve the opponent's attack, but it can also counterattack. Send my regards to the Yin Yang Saber Emperor. The Star-Splitting Saber Monarch was straightforward and did not pester him for too long. In the younger generation, Ajiu was the most tyrannical. Once the 10 strongest martial arts were used, 10 Ajius immediately appeared. Each Ajiu could use a 4th revolution martial art and beat his opponent, a quasi-venerable, into a sorry state. The 10 strongest martial arts complemented each other. It wasn't as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. The 10 martial arts would also fuse together to a certain extent. It was said that when the upper echelons of Ajiu's family knew that Ajiu had evolved the martial art phantom into the 10 strongest martial arts, they unanimously passed the decision to make Ajiu the family's saint son. In their opinion, if Ajiu became a sovereign one day, he would definitely become a legend among sovereigns. The 10 strongest martial arts seemed very difficult to cultivate. After all, one had to cultivate 10 different martial arts. However, once one reached the great accomplishment stage, each martial art would become a supreme martial art. Then, among the sovereigns, there would be almost no one who could be a match for them. This was a kind of martial arts where one would either succeed or die trying. The potential was huge, but the bottleneck was also huge. In this trip to Sovereign Holy Land, Audiobook was determined to win. He was different from Yichen. Yichen walked on the path of pure sword Dao, pursuing self-improvement. On the other hand, Audiobook's 10 strongest martial arts paid attention to the multitude of rivers running into the sea. If he could obtain the inheritance of a sovereign, then he would obtain countless martial arts experience, and reaching the great accomplishment stage of the 10 strongest martial arts would be a lot easier. After all, a sovereign would certainly create more than one supreme martial art in his lifetime. Some outstanding sovereigns could even create dozens of supreme martial arts. In addition to Audiobook, Duguju, Chu Zhongtian, and others, Leng Fifan, Su Jing, and Dantai Mingyue had all risen to prominence in Sovereign Holy Land. In the past, they were only geniuses. But now, they already had the strength to contend against the powerhouses of the older generation. Murong Qingqing was originally not much inferior to them. However, with Yi Chen's resources, pushing her to the 8th layer of life and death realm was already his utmost effort. The rest had the heart but lacked the strength. After all, Yi Chen was just one person. In terms of resources accumulation, he couldn't compare with the big powers or races. In addition to these people, there was also a young woman who was even more shocking. She was Xianhou, the Xianhou who had been missing for 100 years. Back in Elysium, the only people Yi Chen admired were Dragon King and Xianhou. Towards Dragon King, Yi Chen respected the most, and towards Xianhou, Yi Chen truly admired her. If Xianhou didn't spend so much energy on other things, even if her martial strength wasn't as good as Yi Chen's, it wouldn't be too far off. It could be said that in the entire Elysium, only Xianhou could compete with him. Apart from martial Dao, she was also proficient in formations, restrictions, seals, medicine, astrology, and even numerology. The first time she saw Yi Chen, she could tell that Yi Chen's past was shrouded in mist, and so was his future. It was just like the demon's shaman demon king's bloodline could see each other's futures. Even if Xianhou wasn't as good as the shaman demon king's bloodline, she at least had her own essence. After disappearing for 100 years, Xianhou had already broken through to the 8th layer of life and death realm. Her cultivation base was incomparably stable, not much inferior to Yi Chen's. Apart from this, her body was emitting a mysterious aura that seemed to slow down the space-time it came in contact with, becoming reasonable and traceable. This was the embodiment of the mystical path reaching a higher level. If the king of mysticism, who had passed down the mystical path, were to be resurrected and meet the mysterious queen, he would most likely immediately become her disciple. This was because the mysterious queen's mystical path was many times higher than his. It had already reached a level that involved fate. 8 gates of life and death. Xianhou waved her hand, and 8 light gates enveloped the quasi-venerables in front of her. What martial skill is this? The quasi-venerables had never encountered such an opponent. These 8 light gates cut off his connection with the outside world, and even his perception of space-time. He couldn't even tell where his opponent was. Buzz. A light gate behind him suddenly lit up, and a life character appeared on it. Many thanks. The quasi-venerables knew that the opponent didn't want to tangle with him, giving him a way out. His figure flickered, and he entered the life gate. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.